And we will be sending a recording to all registrants. We are going to be providing a link to a form so you can get an attendance certificate in the chat at the end of this program. So watch the chat if you need an attendance certificate. Please put questions for the speakers in the Q&A section of the webinar. You can use the chat to chat with each other, make comments, whatever, but if you have questions specifically for the speakers during the program, please put them in the Q&A so they won't get lost in the chat. They are going to begin with the questions that many of you submitted a bit prior to the program, but we also, as time allows, we'll address the questions that you put in the Q&A. But now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. We are very lucky to have Marianne Hanley and David Stokoe of Syracuse University here with us today. Marianne is the preservation librarian for Syracuse University Libraries. She's also a principal investigator for the New York State Conservation and Preservation Grant Program, which I know many of you have gotten grants from. So thank you, Marianne. David is the conservation librarian for Syracuse University's Special Collections and Research Center. He's worked in a variety of conservation roles in both the United Kingdom and the United States. He has lots of certifications, but he is certified in craft bookbinding. I found that most interesting. And he has a professional associate status with the American Institute of Conservation. So without further ado, I will turn it over to them. And if you have questions or problems with your video, audio, whatever, just put that in the chat and Rebecca and I can help you with that as well.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Rebecca. I think what we're going to do is we're going to start out with the questions that all of you submitted. And the first question, I will go ahead and read it, and David is going to start with this one. So the question is there any new information or best practices regarding care and storage of nitrate negatives? We have a fair number in our collection.
Well, good morning, everybody. I hope it's not snowing in your neck of the woods like it is here. Yeah, it's bad outside, but yes, welcome to the webinar, and I'm glad you can all attend. Yes, nitrate negatives. Let me share well, let me talk a little bit about them first. Yeah, they're potentially dangerous. They have a big reputation for spontaneous combustion. There are certain circumstances required to spontaneously combust. It's something like 2 days in a closed can at some ridiculously high temperature. So although you do need to be careful, there are certain conditions where they're more volatile and explosive than others. They do not need oxygen to continue burning, so they're very difficult to put out if they catch fire. We store ours in freezers, excuse me, and we vapor seal them with marble seal. We suck all the air out. We wrap them in plastic. We've got off-gassing indicators and humidity indicators showing through the different layers of packaging. And we did a data logger test of potential longevity in regular storage compared to in a freezer storage situation. And in our stacks, they were predicted to last about 80, 90 years. And in the freezer, they lasted like 3,700 years. So freezing is the best way to store them. Handling, really, you should be wearing nitrile gloves or latex gloves and not touching them. But yeah, let me share a image of our explosive cabinets. Can people see this? Yes. So yeah, these cabinets have explosive. Well, they have fire suppression systems, sprinklers inside, and they also have a blowout vent in the top of the cabinets. In case something happens. And these are actually stored inside the freezer, and they're still wrapped in vapor-proof packaging. So Yeah, I think there are limitations on how much you can transport from one site to another. I think it's 25 pounds, and they need to be, transported in fire retardant and fireproof sealed metal drums. So I think that probably covers everything. They do smell, but they don't smell as bad as cellulose acetate. So people often think that if they're smelling something bad, it's got to be nitrate, and that's not necessarily the case. Usually on the edge of a film, a roll of film, it'll have safety film or nitrate film, and they often have the plate negatives, the plastic negatives. The nitrates have different V shapes cut out of one of the edges, and there are resources online so you can count how many cutouts or notches there are and then identify them, whether it's nitrate or acetate or safety film.
Okay. So it looks like our next question that was sent to us is, what type of book tape works best? So David and I had a discussion about this because this is a question that is really a bit of a can of worms. So when we talk about book tape, there's two different mentalities. So on the one mentality, you're thinking about long term, and you're thinking about conservation grade and something that is archival. On the other hand, you think about something that maybe a mass market paperback, something that you're not going to keep for the long term, and it's something that you're going to use a book tape, you're going to retape it, let's say it circulates and it starts to tear, the spine starts to come apart. So you bring it back, you would retape it, send it out again, have it to circulate, and just back and forth, retape it until you withdraw it. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It is something that you've got your money's worth, and then you would replace it. So with something like that, you wouldn't need an archival book tape, something vinyl, something acrylic. Acrylics are sometimes archival, sometimes they're not. But some specific things that I can recommend more along the conservation grade, I would look for something that's labeled archival. It should be acid-free, and that way it's non-yellowing, and it would certainly go the distance. It would last a lot longer. So if we're thinking about repairing paper in a book, I would recommend something like a Filmoplast P, which is an archival mending tape. It is wonderful for repairing rips in paper. It's virtually undetectable, and it comes in a box, maybe 1 inch by 100 feet, that long. You could get it, and you can get it from Amazon. You can also get it from Demco, Gaylord, companies like that, that you would be able to purchase it from. It costs about $25 to $30 a roll, but it's quite long, and it lasts a long time. So different book tapes that we recommend. You could also go with something like a high quality fabric back tape, like a Filmoplast T. So that would be T as in Tom. And something like that, you could reline a spine on a book. You could use it for replacing a spine. So a couple different ways of using tapes. Like I said, there are all kinds of tapes, and for the most part, just look for that archival. Okay. So let's talk about our next question is how to preserve old book spines. Do you want to start with this, David? And this is something
Yeah.
we can both speak to.
Yeah, I'm not muted, am I? No. Yeah, I mean, as Marianne points out, there's differences between sort of special collections, ethics, if you like, and circulating. I know Marianne's going to talk about rebuilding in a different way that I do, but old book spines, if you have no resources, tie the book up so that the spine doesn't get separated. There's a product called grip tights, which are basically a linen tape with it's like a lasso, so you don't need to tie knots, you just tighten them up. And you could use a few of those to reattach the spine to the book temporarily until you can get around to repairing it. I know in our stacks, sometimes you find spines on the floor below where the books are. But in special collections, I would possibly use Japanese paper and PVA to reattach the spine. So you put it back in its original position and wedge it against the book and use Japanese paper, thin dry tear strips, and possibly a few layers overlapping with PVA to reattach them. You can also color the Japanese paper once once the spine's back on the text block using acrylics. So yeah, we take a slightly different approach. And yeah, I think if you have no resources, then make sure it doesn't get separated from the book and damaged anymore. But that's the special collections procedure. I'll hand it over to Marianne.
Yeah, as David said, he's more along the lines of the special collections, where I'm dealing more with circulating collections. So we do things a little bit differently. Our volume is much larger in our preservation lab as opposed to David's conservation lab. But when we preserve old book spines, we would use, as David said, a PVA, which is a polyvinyl acetate type of glue. And you don't have to use a PVA though. You could use something like a 403 craft glue. I think sometimes they call it jade, 403 jade craft glue. You know, something that you could get from Amazon or Michael's or something like that. And it's a glue that doesn't dry stiffly, because that's the last thing you want to do once you're re-gluing a spine. You don't want your glue to dry hard and then have it break again. So this is a something that will not do that. So two different mentalities again of the type of repair that David's using, the Japanese tissue, and I'm using more of the PVA. And maybe your mid-size public library would use same thing, more of a PVA, more of a craft glue to repair it. Okay, so our next question is something that we have seen over and over in the questions. And the question is, what supplies do you recommend that we buy? So what we have here is a slide that I'm going to share with a list of different tools that we would recommend that you would use for circulating collections. So the first item that you'll see on the left-hand side are the scissors. I think we both pretty much use similar scissors. What do you think, David? Yes?
Yeah, it's virtually the same toolkit that I have, yes.
Okay. Yes, I often recommend Fiskars just because they are high quality, and they last a long time. And what I love about them is I'm left-handed, and these are scissors that are ambidextrous. So right-handed, left-handed, they work for both. You can get different size scissors, smaller for smaller repairs, and or something larger for cutting cloth or paper. The next item would be the utility knife or the Olfa knife, and this is just a snap-off blade knife, and it locks in at any length. I think there's about 8 snap-off blades. It's nothing conservation grade or anything. It's just great for slicing through cloth, and it helps with control of it too. It's important though, keep your blade sharp, because after a while, you're not getting a straight, clean cut if it's not sharp. This next item is a spatula, and we use a micro spatula, which is what this is, to lift labels, maybe slip paper. It's also great for applying adhesive in hard to reach places. Again, you want to keep it clean. You can also get them macro spatulas, a little bit bigger, larger. They come in all different sizes. Then we've got a bookbinding knife. This one has a square point at the top. You can also find one that is pointed. What you don't want, though, is something that is really sharp. It's not really meant, we're not looking for a sharp knife here. We're looking for more of cleaning spines with it, or I don't know, what else would you use that for, your lifting, your bookbinding knife, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, you can separate the cloth or leather from the boards, slightly, very carefully, just slit the cloth or the leather from the board so that you can put a new piece of cloth underneath to replace a spine. I keep mine a bit sharper than Marianne's because I use mine for cutting book cloth and a few other things, paper. But yeah, I use slightly different techniques for cleaning spines off rather than scraping. I would actually be putting like a damp poultice of maybe a paste onto the spine to soften up the glue so I can remove it. But then special collections, I need to tread a bit more carefully than the circulating collections. But yes, it's a good tool to have. I have an English one, Sheffield Steel, which is basically a cobbler's knife, and that's the one I prefer. But the American ones from Gaylord or whoever are really good too.
Yeah, they last a long time with those. The next item is kind of an unusual item. It's an acrylic rod, and we use that when you've got your hinges to your books. So let's say your top hinge, you're opening and closing it, you're using it all the time, it starts to wear, and your hinge just starts to get a little loose. So we use a tool like this acrylic rod just to insert it down into the hinge of the book and add a little bit of glue to tighten it. We say that often it's the first thing to go in a book is your hinge gets loose. You drop it on the floor, it gets tossed around, a book gets tossed around in a backpack. So this will just help tighten your front and your back hinges. If you don't have an acrylic rod, you can use something like a knitting needle. There's other things, but just to dip that in the spine and tighten it up a little bit. The next are bone folders. There are 2 different bone folders that I'm showing here. These tools are a favorite of conservators, librarians, bookbinders. They're great for making permanent creases. It's a dull-edged hand tool, and we use it also to fold. They can be made from a leg bone of a cow or a deer, but they can also be made of plastic or acrylic, like a Teflon. So this one is made of a leg of a deer or a cow, and this one is the Teflon. So they can be a little sharper. They come with different size tips, but we end up using this material all the time in both of our positions. Next would be the brushes. We recommend more of a dense brush with natural bristles if you can get those. It's important to keep it clean, wash it often. You've got more of a plastic brush here, which is a cheaper alternative, but wash it, use it 50 times and then toss it. You know, something like this, wooden handled, and sometimes they're made of horsehair brushes. They last a little longer. Well, they last much longer, but they're certainly more expensive too. So the next item that I'm showing here is a ruler. You can use just a regular ruler. We also have safety rulers. There's a sort of a raised in between the ruler in the center of it so that you can put your hand on one side, kind of a rail there, and then you can put the knife on the other side. So there's less chance of slipping. They're also rubber backed that help also with the slipping. If you notice, the whole thing is sitting on a cutting mat. We have lined our benches, both of us, with cutting mats. And this way you don't scratch your bench, the surfaces. Cutting mats are self-healing and they show inch, metric measurements. They also have diagonal cuts. It's something that we use, it's just a surface for cutting on. There's also some wax paper that is in there, just wax paper. You don't need any special wax paper. It just provides a barrier. It protects pages while your adhesive is drying. We also show some glue in a little container there to the left. And again, we've talked about it, a PVA, a white glue that you can purchase. Try and go with an acid-free and a flexible drying product. I missed anything on here? I think I got everything. So
If you look shopping for cheap brushes, and they're kind of disposable, Crayola school brushes, $1.10. I teach a class, and the students never wash out their brushes properly, so it's a way of replacing brushes without too much expense. Yeah, about $1.10. So they do tend to shed a little bit, but they're reasonably good.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at our next question here that was sent in. So what are the best practices for protecting library collections prior to a large-scale renovation project?
I think this is me. Yeah, with quite a lot of disaster response experience, which Marianne has as well. Yeah, I've worked in various institutions. The worst renovation we had was when I worked at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. And we had new roofs, new windows, new HVAC, all kinds of things, elevators. And I would recommend, if you've got upcoming renovations, to get involved with the building crew. There's probably an in-house construction committee that's going to regulate things, and get involved, get to know the constructors, make sure that either they're going to provide plastic sheeting or you are, duct tape, and make sure that things are properly covered before they start doing work, because we had a recent re-roofing project on our Belfer Audio Lab. Let me show you, share this image. Yeah, this is just part of the roof, but you can see that it was paved over the top, and they had to take the pavers off and then remove the ceiling layer. We found an empty bottle of champagne and all kinds of things. People have been sitting up there partying, students. But yeah, plastic sheeting the interior as much as you can. We actually installed a water alarm system, which is kind of hardwired and connected to a Wi-Fi situation, so that we could get notification if water did come in. And we're doing daily walkthroughs. But yes, checking in with the construction crew. The plastic sheeting prevents water ingress, well, not ingress, but prevents it getting damaged. It also stops dust. They were re-roofing, so there's big machinery and lots of piles of debris on the roof, and the weight and the vibrations tend to cause a bit of dust coming from the ceiling. So yeah, I'd recommend lots of plastic sheeting, duct tape to keep it in place, water alarms, either hardwired or standalone. You can buy a water alarm from any hardware store for about $10 or $20. They come with a 6-foot wire, so you can have the contact wires attached to the ground or the floor with a couple of bits of duct tape. They have a 9-volt battery and a 120 decibel screech alarm. The only downside for those alarms is that if there's nobody there, nobody hears it. It's the tree falling in the forest routine. But the hardwired ones are really much more extensive. I think ours was about $6,000. The one I installed in New York City was way more expensive, and it was just a telephone hookup. So there are different options. Yeah, plastic sheeting and duct tape, and absorbent booms. We have like large 6 or 10-foot long booms that absorb 1 gallon of water per foot. And you can use those if water does come in. You can use those to stop it spreading. They absorb all of the water and then they form a dam. So, but I think vigilance, plastic sheeting, and duct tape are your best friends.
Yeah, I would agree, definitely. All right, our next question that we have here are, what is the best way to repair a spiral bound book when both covers have ripped off?
I think this is for me, Marianne. Yeah. Yeah, it depends really on whether it's a plastic spiral binding or cone binding, or a metal one. There are machines, Marianne was looking into this the other day. You can still buy a cone binding machine, which has a lot of teeth on it that pull the plastic binding open so that you can reposition your pages if they've still got the holes intact. If the holes aren't intact and you want to replace covers that have come off, then you're going to have to do some taping and then possibly, well, actually the machines do have a punch option, so you can punch the relevant holes into blank sheets of paper and then use the comb separator to put them into the plastic comb. If it's a metal comb, I'm afraid you're out of luck. They don't open up. They just bend and stay bent.
Yeah, and I also want to just add that these are things that neither one of us really likes.
Yeah.
The comb binding breaks, like you said, they get brittle. The wire, it bends. You can buy the re-gluing machine. I actually did do some research this week, and you can get re-gluing machines still on Amazon. They're about $200. I'm being totally honest, I've never had one. I've never tried it, so I don't know how well it really works. But this is something that if we get them in the library, we would chop it in the circulating collection and we would do a double adhesive fan glue on it. So removing the wire or the comb binding and just re-gluing it and covering it with some kind of buckram cloth tape and sending it out to circulate. If we could tell, I know that they're great for certain types of books, but they're not great from preservation or conservation standpoint.
If you don't have a machine, your local copy shop might have an option. Either the comb binding machine or a hot glue situation. So they might be a reasonable price if you don't have the equipment or the staff and resources.
Right. Someone just put in the chat, for example, a cookbook. And I get that. For a cookbook, it's nice. It lays flat. You're able to turn the pages, and it makes sense, more of a reference book. But for your average library and who's repairing 100 books a week, they're frustrating. So, all right, let's go ahead and take a look at our next question. So someone asked me about framing a large but delicate damaged map. So the question says they're guessing that it has some tears, and they want to know if it can be preserved through framing. So I can just add this bit. We talked about in circulating collections, tears. And again, I would recommend archival Filmoplast P as in Paul for this mending tape for the tears. We got quite a bit of maps and architectural drawings that come through, and we use that, or we use a heat set tissue to repair the tears.
So if I can chip in,
Sure.
yeah, it is. Again, there's some slight differences between special collections and circulating, and some of it depends really on not only on your resources, but the chemical stability of the paper. If it's highly acidic, then putting it into a frame is creating a microclimate where it's not got anywhere to off-gas. It can't breathe, so the off-gassing tends to be trapped in with the paper, so it can accelerate the aging, the acid hydrolysis. Framing would preserve the map, although you're opening it up to light exposure, although most acrylics, museum quality acrylic plexiglass, if you like, filters out ultraviolet light. So framing would protect it to some degree from light exposure. If you were going to display it, and it would protect it physically. In terms of repair, in special collections, I probably would use either Japanese paper and wheat starch paste. You can buy wheat starch paste that's pre-cooked from the likes of Gaylord, and you just add water and make sure it's not lumpy, 100% reversible, and Japanese paper strips to repair the tears. At a push, I would use heat set tissue that Marianne mentioned. I kind of stay away from archival repair tapes, although they are good, and it's not really appropriate for special collections material. But yeah, you wouldn't necessarily have to do the repairs if you were going to frame it, because it would be physically protected and nobody can touch it. So that's my take. Actually, sorry, we kind of missed a question. The most effective way to remove accumulated dust from booktops. What if a layer is stuck on the booktop despite being blown off? I want to step back to that question for a second. You can use a blower to remove loose surface dirt. You can then use a vacuum with a soft brush to remove anything that's a bit more stubborn. And you can use smoke sponges, which are vulcanized rubber sponge used in the janitorial sector for removing dirt and debris. But they work really well for cleaning paper. And as long as the top of the book, when you're cleaning it, is compressed, so you're not driving the dirt further down into the pages, then I think that would be my take. You could possibly use vinyl erasers as well if nothing else works. Slightly more abrasive, but still sympathetic. I think Marianne would probably do much of the same.
I would do the same. The one thing with the smoke sponges, they come in about the size of a brick, and we chop them. So we just use little pieces, and when we're done cleaning, we just toss it, just throw it away. I think it says it can be cleaned, but we don't clean them.
I tried washing one out. It took 3 months to dry.
Yeah. Like you said, it's that vulcanized rubber, so it's pretty solid, pretty compressed there. So, but no, I agree really with what David said about the cleaning. All right, let's see. We've got, so how important is it to maintain print originals of artifacts if the digital version has been created?
Shall I go first?
Sure.
Again, differences between special collections and circulating. In special collections, even if we've digitized stuff, the original is still vitally important as a sort of vehicle of evidence, demonstrating the type of paper, the type of ink. It could be manuscript. So even when we digitize, we keep originals of pretty much everything. And I think Marianne's take is slightly different.
Yes. So there's a couple different mentalities with digitizing. We have certainly gone to purchasing more digital books. I know it is the sign of the times, and they're more accessible. They last longer. They'll last forever, I guess, out in the digital world. And when we do digitize them, We will keep the original. We keep it in storage. If we're going to, I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds with this, but there are many different shared print programs that we are part of. Syracuse University is part of HathiTrust. We're part of East Coalition. So we are responsible for maintaining a working copy of the item, so that if we ever needed to access it, we would have it. So that's more of a research facility. That's pretty much how we handle it at Syracuse University. I'm sure other institutions handle it differently, and if we're thinking more along the lines of a public library, maybe you don't have the space to keep it. So once you have the digitized copy, that's all you need. Patrons can access it, and you wouldn't have a need to go back or to lend it. We, as part of our East Coalition and HathiTrust, our shared print programs, we have to keep a copy to lend.
And the next question is kind of off the back of that, was how to handle preserving newspaper clippings in a cost-effective manner. Are print copies necessary to be kept if we can also access these online, or they have been digitized? And newspaper cuttings are generally mechanical wood pulp, which is highly acidic, a big lignin content. And they're kind of ephemeral in that the newspaper wasn't going to be used the day after it was published. But obviously we're keeping stuff. Do not use mylar enclosures with things that are acidic. It's back to that microclimate where things off gas and have the gases have nowhere to go to. If they're in really bad shape, I know in the past I've worked at places that would photocopy newspaper clippings. The copier paper produced today is chemically stable. So it's a cheap and easy method, but digitization would actually be probably a better option in terms of public access. But even if you're just photocopying something, excuse me, but in special collections, we'd still keep the originals, unless they were really bad with mold, and past redemption, if you like. Although in special collections, nothing is past redemption. We'd keep it anyway. So, but yeah, microclimates, enclosures for acidic paper are really bad. And if you are trying to store newspaper clippings, acid-free envelopes, paper rather than plastics.
Okay. So our next question, what can be done to prolong the life of vintage perfect bound books with brittle glue that consistently fall apart? I can start with this. First, I want to just let people know what a perfect bound book is. So that's a book that's been bound with glue. It hasn't been sewn, and often the glue is pretty thick, that you find, and after a while it starts to crack. And this is a vintage perfect bound book with brittle glue. So it depends how deep you want to get into it with this book. You could box it. You could purchase a box from Gaylord, from Hollinger Metal Edge. Anybody else coming to you off the top of your head with purchasing boxes? David?
I think you've covered it. We have our own box making machine, so
Right.
lost interest in vendor suppliers.
I know we're lucky. We have a beautiful box making machine here at Syracuse University that we have used to box brittle books, especially circulating collections or books that are going into storage. But like I said, with the perfect bound books, and if something is brittle, then I would be hesitant to chop it and re-glue it because it is brittle. So think of brittle, it's starting to crumble. It's probably yellowed with age. It might have been stored improperly. So my recommendation for that would be to box it. All right, so we've got our next question is, I'm working on organizing our local history special collections. And if someone could speak on that.
Yeah, I think that's falling to me. Organizing a collection. Well, as Marianne and I were talking about this yesterday, neither of us are catalogers or processing archivists, but I can offer some advice. I think, yeah, we're kind of assuming that you know, the processing has been done, and you have a list of everything. We have databases, spreadsheets of accession data, collections, and locations. And all of this really is done by professional catalogers according to Library of Congress standards. And so we don't have a whole lot of involvement with that part of things. But I think from an overall point of view, you probably really need a strategic plan, which also helps you get funding from grant funding agencies. If you don't have a strategic plan, you're not looking as professional as they would like you to. Also, a disaster plan, a collection policy, an acquisitions policy, if you're going to build on that particular collection, and a collections use policy. But yes, I'm sorry, I can't really talk to the cataloging aspect or the arrangements other than to say that whatever order or sequence, whether it's chronological or whatever, as it arrives in a certain order, you don't really want to be disturbing that, and trying to keep the running order, not separating things. If somebody's requiring a box of documents that are relating to a specific person, you wouldn't be separating the books from the letters necessarily, and try and keep things in the same order and together, and itemized, so you've got an inventory. But yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not a cataloger. It's not really my specialism.
Okay, our next question is suggestions for determining priority order for preservation issues, activities, and then also suggestions for vendors or ways to keep cost low.
Shall I jump in?
Sure, go ahead and then I'll follow after you.
Yeah, I think both of us really work to other people's priorities to a greater extent. I generally have a lot of exhibition work, which is time limited, and there's a certain timeline that I have to follow. And we do have issues that come up in the reading room with special collections that are flagged, and I have a dedicated shelf with a sort of a boilerplate form that they fill in to tell me what the problem is, whether it's a high or low priority. Generally, that aspect of things, unless it's going on exhibition or is being used in a class for teaching. It takes a back burner to anything that's a bit more important. You know, when the dean asks for something that's being requested by a donor or by you know, somebody that's going to donating either collections or cash towards preservation issues, then obviously they take priority. Excuse me. But yeah, I think we both have project work, which we work to for most of the year. And anything that comes up from either exhibitions or through the dean or somebody that has the power, then we generally leave the project work and deal with that kind of stuff first.
Yeah, I would agree. Our priority order for preservation issues, if something has circulated and comes back and needs work, it would go to the top of the pile. We would also think during slow times, maybe the summers, we do interactively go out into the stacks and pull things that we might have missed during the year. There's also different suggestions for vendors, the question said, or to keep costs low. We use a bindery that it's called HF Group, and I believe it's out of Indiana. There's one in North Carolina. We get a pickup and it goes to whatever bindery it's being sent to. Keeping costs low. So in a smaller library, maybe looking for a skilled volunteer, someone who might know what they're doing. Also keeping costs low. Sometimes buying items in bulk helps. I might be able to get materials cheaper, but there used to be binderies all over that, but over the years they have slowly closed and have been bought out by larger binderies. So we would use something like that, a bindery for maybe journals that need to be bound, going into storage, for something that's really what we use it mostly for. Maybe a music bound book that we would send out that we want bound a certain way, but we pretty much do everything else in-house. Okay, let's see here. So here's one. What causes the book tape on some books to turn yellow and become loose, with the glue becoming dusty and discoloring the book underneath? So for years we used regular tape, and that we found reacts with cellulose fibers in your paper, and it leads it to yellow over time. Anything acidic, sunlight is going to cause it to yellow over time. I wouldn't leave things, in direct sunlight. We recommend, again, archival materials, but book tape, old book tape that wasn't acid-free is going to turn yellow and become loose.
Yeah, with a bit of luck, it deteriorates so much that it falls off, and then you don't have to remove it. And you can, with some tapes, you can freeze the paper, and it will encourage it to come off a bit quicker. In terms of stain removal, it's really a professional conservator's job. The yellow staining that stays there, you can run solvents through on a vacuum table, which often removes the stains. An art restorer, rather than a conservator, would probably use some kind of bleaching agent, chloramine T or sodium thiosulfate to neutralize the bleach. You can also use light to reduce the stains, but it's really a specialist situation. If you can remove the tape without doing any damage to the paper, then I generally think I can live with the stain. Because you removed the plastic, and sometimes you can gently with a spatula, you can remove some of the adhesive. If it's dried out and crunchy, you can scrape off this, the surface, but you have to be careful.
Some of these questions that I'm going to skip because we've already answered them. So David just mentioned stains. We did get a question, how do you get stains out of covers and paper? And is it possible?
And as I just said, yes. Certainly with paper, the majority of the stain can be removed, whether it's an adhesive from a pressure-sensitive tape, Scotch tape, as it's often referred to. But if it's like oil stains or grease stains, Marianne and I were talking yesterday, she got a book returned that had a burger stain on it, cooking oil. And again, it can be removed a lot of the time, but really you need a professional vacuum table with suction that is able to deal with solvents running through the motor without exploding. So they can be removed, but it's not something I would recommend anybody without training to try and attempt.
There are different things that we use in circulating. For David mentioned that I once had a journal returned and I could see the entire outline of a hamburger on it. There was grease and pretty heavy. It leaked through multiple pages. So for something like that, definitely act fast as soon as you find it. Who knows, it could have been something older. But so for that type of thing, I used baby powder or baking soda. So these things aren't going to stain and they're going to soak up that grease. I sprinkled a little baby powder and I put it on a tissue and placed it underneath the page. And then I sprinkled it directly on the page on the top of it. So you had it underneath, you had it on the top. I put a weight on it and I left it for about 12 hours and it did remove about 80% of the stain. So there are things that you can do. I've also had stains where anything I did, I just couldn't get it out.
All right, I'm sharing an image here from, you guys see that?
Yes.
It mentions the use of talcum powder for cleaning books and all kinds of different uses, but of course now it's supposedly carcinogenic. So there's Fuller's Earth as well. There's various things you can use, but yeah, talcum powder but wear gloves and make sure you're not breathing the stuff in.
Yeah.
We just had a question in chat about could you send us that baby powder document? So I don't know, you can email it to me and I can forward it, or I don't know if you have a link right there that you could put in chat.
I'll email it to Susan.
Okay.
Actually, I can do it now.
So here's a question. What are resources for more training and preservation related information for someone looking to get into preservation? I'll let David start with this. People take different paths getting into conservation and preservation. Actually, before I have David start, I'll talk about how there's workshops, definitely online, something like this. I'll share a slide of different things that local places that you can attend, that you can go to. But if you're really thinking of jumping into this wholeheartedly, there is a master's degree in conservation that right now Buffalo State has and University of Delaware. So you can attend a full master's program. There's also the North Bennett School in Boston where you could attend and learn bookbinding. I don't know if anything else you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, vocational training is an option if you can't get into a formalized training situation. Volunteering at Skinny Atlas has a commercial conservation facility, and you know, they take internships and volunteers that are appropriate, you know, with the right amount of dexterous skills. But yeah, vocational training or formal is really the only way in. I was kind of lucky. I was apprenticed at the age of 17 on a formal training scheme in England that was kind of organized so they'd send me away to different record offices for a month at a time doing different format conservation projects. But yeah, there's a little bit of chemistry involved, but most of the chemistry has already been researched and it's kind of carved in stone. But I think volunteering, or there's the option of looking at different videos online. You know, YouTube, as Marianne said, there's a lot of different excuse me, resources showing you how to do a complete read back of a book, or how to clean paper, how to do fan glue binding for paperbacks, leather bindings. So yeah, I think personal research is probably the easiest and most convenient way to start building on your skill set. But yeah, I think a formal training program, and as Marianne pointed out, it's not only binderies that have bitten the dust, but a lot of conservation programs have as well. Texas used to have a really good program. I'm not sure if they still do. Columbia University in New York City used to have a rare book program for binders. So yeah, I think researching online and just finding opportunities and making yourself available, and it's a bit of a commitment.
I did just put up a slide of different workshops that people can take this Preserve This has online preservation courses and topics related to preservation. Lyrasis offers live webinars. NEDCC, the Northeast Document Conservation Center, was actually the first place that I ever took a workshop. And they've got a lot of on-demand programs that are free. And I've put the links in here. Another one, Amigos Library Service. They've got their Know and Go series. And certainly your local library consortiums. We're putting a plug in here. That offer all kinds of different programs, but I'd look around, like David said, and see what is available. What minimum annual budget do you recommend for a mid-size academic library doing repairs? This one, David, scared David and I. Because it's really difficult to give a budget. We talk about staff, how much you're paying your staff, how much it costs for materials. There's just a lot of moving targets with answering this question. So an annual budget, like I said, we can't really give it, but we can recommend that your staff takes some of these workshops and learns how to do the repairs. There are a lot of online different programs. Syracuse University has a YouTube page that we have many different videos on step-by-step guides to repairing. Here's one on spine repair. We've got one on full repairs. There's wet book rescues here, what to do. So we've got a lot of different, I encourage you to take a look. I also encourage you, there's so many videos out there on YouTube, and not all of them are 100% correct. So make sure that you are watching one from a reputable, sponsored from a reputable institution or from a conservator. I watched some of them and they cut a lot of corners. So just be careful. But we've got on this one things like cloth reback, hinge tightening, page repairs. So a lot of different good information here. And that is SUL, Syracuse University Library Preservation. I'll do one plug in that we have a water rescue video that has right now looks like 830,000 views. So that's one of our most popular videos.
I've just copied a link from my YouTube page into the chat, and it's got some fan gluing, how to make a cradle, other bits and pieces, which you might find useful. I know one of my colleagues had trouble accessing this before, so if If it doesn't work, let me know, and I'll try and rectify that.
All right.
Covers, how to cover a book without a dust jacket, avoiding laminate. I'll talk to that for a second. Yeah, a lot of dust jacket covers. I know Gaylord offers a roll of dust jacket covers, which has one edge on the roll turned in already. So you slide your dust jacket cover in there, and you turn the bottom edge in and cut it to size. But this is books without a dust jacket. You could pretty much use that same product to just wrap a book. The Gaylord versions don't have adhesives on them. You could use pressure sensitive tape, Scotch tape, to secure them, but then the tape is going to hit the top and bottom of the board where you glue round, unless you double up with a piece of tape in the middle of the attachment. I would avoid laminates at all costs, which is what the question is about. The adhesives are not great. They tend to discolor the paper they're in contact with on the fold-ins. They discolor book cloth and leather. A lot of substandard book covering materials in the past have been made from PVC, polyvinyl chloride, which degrades, goes yellow, it becomes brittle. It also, under pressure, it will self-laminate to the book it's wrapped around, and also to its neighbors. Yeah, I think Mylar, archival Mylar, which is unplastic, has no plasticizing agents, and just a simple wrap round to protect the actual leather or cloth.
So here is probably a question that we're going to have the most fun with. This one is, why are publishers allowed to distribute books with such shoddy bindings? This one, I think we can all agree that many of books, their binding quality has deteriorated over time through the years. Cost and competition are probably the main reason for this. It used to be we spent all this extra money for a library binding, and you pay a little more, and it's still better than the regular bookstore quality, the library binding, and you do get better quality. But sometimes it's the design of the book also that makes it faulty. We get these heavy books that we purchase in the library, maybe something that is an architectural book or a photographic book. And sometimes the text block is just too heavy for the binding. And as soon as it gets moved around, dropped, or opened a few times, the text block starts to pull away from the binding. So another thing that is sort of a pet peeve, I guess, are publishers' bindings that send all these extra pieces. They send big books, little books, pictures, jewelry, different things that just aren't practical for a library. So we have to figure out how to circulate those and get those pieces to be able to be checked out. A lot of times we design boxes for them with little openings so that each piece can go into different, parts of the boxes. So things that we find just kind of frustrating, with publishers. I'd love to talk to a publisher someday from a library standpoint, but David, I'll let you add what you think too.
Sorry, yes, I was trying to figure out how to get my videos available, but I think I'll talk to you later about that, and we'll probably put them on your preservation page. Yeah, I mean, publishers cut corners, shoddy bindings, it's a cost-saving exercise, although during the Industrial Revolution and periods afterwards, they cut corners big time with highly acidic paper, cheap book cloth, leather that hadn't been tanned properly, and it was basically, put out as much product as possible at a low price so you can sell as much as possible. And the long-term preservation aspects in the past weren't really considered at all. And a lot of binders and a lot of publishers still use lower quality papers. But you get what you pay for, basically. A paperback is cheap. It's in the past it's been highly acidic, but I think paperbacks are a little stronger these days. But it's a cost exercise, cost benefit analysis.
I think we've got a little less than 15 minutes left.
Yeah.
So we're gonna just pick and choose our questions here. I don't know if you have any.
There are a couple in the Q&A. One
Okay.
was, where can you get nice brushes? And I know you already talked about the Crayola brushes, David, but I don't know if you had anything else to add to that.
You can get nice brushes from a lot of different conservation suppliers. Some of them, I use Japanese hake brushes, and they're about $150 each. So yeah, I mean, any art store, I think the thing about brushes is that don't go too cheap unless you're using them for a limited amount of time. And if you do go to an art store, if you can clean out your brushes properly and dry them properly, because the metal fixtures tend to rust. But again, it's you get what you pay for, and pretty much any art store is going to have a good selection. And if you can stay away from the metal fixtures, they tend to go rusty. The Crayola brushes, I'm afraid, some of them, the entire brush falls out of the plastic handle occasionally, but with a bit of hot glue, you can glue them back in.
I want to share a slide that, let's see, that has some recommendations of different vendors that we do recommend. Between David and I, we use some of the same vendors, some different vendors. Gaylord is a vendor that we've used for years. Gaylord Archival. I believe that Demco owns Gaylord, and a lot of their supplies and cloth, book cloth and things like that now Demco sells. So either one of those, I'd check both. We've got Talus is a place where David and I purchase our tools from often. We've got Hollinger Metal Edge, where we would get, I know is known for their boxing, but so is Talus also. make specific boxes, and so does Gaylord make boxing. So Capco is more of a peel and place vendor. So that would be more if you're looking for a peel and stick to maybe cover your paperbacks or reinforce the spines on your magazines or music binds. So each one is known for different things, but any others that you can add that you can think of, David?
No, those are the primary ones that I've used. There's conservation resources. Yeah, Hollinger Metal Edge, they're all good. And I would advise you, if you're buying stuff, to shop around, because no disrespect to Gaylord, but sometimes they're way more expensive for some things than other suppliers. So shop around. And you know, if you're buying a lot of stuff, then you know, you want to see if you can compare and possibly negotiate a discount. See if somebody will beat somebody else's prices. Yeah, no, those are all good suppliers, but nothing's cheap, as you all well know, especially in the archival product world. It's a very niche outlet, and limited purchases, and yeah, they kind of crank up the prices a bit because they know they're not going to sell too much of a product. So.
Susan, are there any other questions that?
Yes,
Oh.
there's a question about conservation programs, and it says, do you need a background in chemistry? That's what put me off that path, the chemistry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not particularly great at chemistry. Yeah, I didn't do great at it at school. But a lot of the chemistry, as I said, is pretty much already been researched and approved. There haven't been many changes in my experience of 42 years. And I was lucky enough that my apprenticeship included a week's intensive chemistry to go through all the relevant stuff that deals with book and paper conservation. I don't think it's essential. I think it's advantageous. But yeah, knowing a little bit, you know, about pH values, acidity, alkalinity, I think the basics is a good place to start. But I don't think it's a deal breaker if you're going into a situation where you're interning or volunteering or starting out, you know, as a technician in a library, or volunteering at whatever, at a private conservators, because most of the chemistry has really been tried and tested. We don't take risks.
No. No, speaking of we don't take risks, we've got a question here. What type of damage would you consider unrepairable? I think we're both going to speak to this, but there's the one thing that comes to mind immediately for me with circulating collection is mold. When items are returned with mold. I actually just gave a talk yesterday on mold and bugs in the library. And I spoke to someone who told me that they had an outbreak of mold in their library, and they were trying to take care of it themselves, and they developed a respiratory cough from just jumping in and breathing in all those mold spores that were in the library. So mold can be really dangerous to people with allergies, people with immune problems, and in some cases can pose a major health hazard. So I don't like to touch it. I always use gloves when I do. if you're going to clean it, which is something that we rarely do, but make sure that you're in a well-ventilated area. Make sure you're wearing protective clothing, a mask, possibly goggles. We do have special vacuums that have HEPA filters for cleaning the mold. So just be careful with that.
So I just want to show a picture, just for novelty value. Did it come up?
Yes.
I can't see, but yeah, a picture of a library disaster. You guys can see it?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, domino effect of shelving falling over, and according to the text, it took them 1 day to put everything back on the shelf, but not many books were hurt in the making of this disaster.
Wow.
Have I stopped sharing now? Yes.
Actually, we can see you have not stopped sharing. It looks like you're sharing a different screen.
Oh, am I? Oh.
It's okay. We don't see anything.
Oh yeah.
There's nothing secret on there.
I was looking for web links. Yeah, I've got apologies that my YouTube channel, I know a colleague of mine had trouble accessing it as well. I'll work with Marianne to put them into her YouTube page, and I think I'll dig out a link for the box machine, because I think everybody would be interested in that. Not that you could probably afford one at smaller institutions, but it's probably the same machine that Gaylord uses, and they have a web page where if they'll make you a custom box on this particular machine, and you just choose you punch in your sizes and the type of box and the material, and they'll make a box for you. So boxing is really a backstop of not having to do conservation or repairs. Just keep the parts together and keep them physically protected. So, and that's really a lot of what I do, depending on the value of the book. And I think Marianne's the same. Everything that's going to our offsite storage facility has to be boxed up for transportation. But yeah, I'll share my I'll share the web link. It's on my other computer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions of people asking if they can get the slides, links on your slides. So if anything you want to share with people, you all can send to me, and then I can send it out to the registrants later. We have about 2 minutes left, and there are two brief questions. I don't know if you want to take them. One is just about the talcum powder. If it's been taken off the market, will baby powder still be effective if it doesn't contain the talcum?
I think it probably would. And yeah, Fuller's Earth, that kind of stuff, just anything that's absorbent. I can't think. Marianne, do you have any ideas? Did you use bicarbonate of soda?
The baking
For
soda?
For stain removals.
Yes, that's what I would use instead. That's what I would recommend.
Bicarbonate soda.
Or in addition to the talcum, well, the powder without the talcum.
Yeah.
So, but yes, we use baking soda also, baking powder, one of those, which help to soak it up.
Okay,
Yeah.
and the last question, it's not really a small question, but you addressed it somewhat already. So if you have anything further to add to this last question, it says, should obsolete physical media such as video cassettes, VHS, and tapes still be preserved even if digital copies exist? So like I said, I know that could be a whole webinar, but if you have any brief things to add to that.
I would say yes. It's back to, I mean, we digitize everything in our audio lab. Excuse me. But we've got such a backlog that we don't have enough staff or resources. But yes, preserve everything you can, just in case the digital copy goes sideways. Digital copies have to be migrated to newer formats as you go forwards. But the acronym LOCKS, lots of copies keep stuff safe. And you lose your digital, you've still got the analog. With a lot of that media, you have to keep it away from magnetic, electric motors, etc., because the magnets will demagnetize and wipe your tapes. But yeah, I would say if you've got it, keep a hold of it. Certainly if it's rare or valuable. Yeah, my computer at home just got hit with a power strike, and it shorted the computer. But fortunately, I had everything backed up on a big old-fashioned 0.5 terabyte hard drive, and managed to get it to work enough that I could download it to something else. And that's kind of typical. If you've got two copies and you lose one, you've still got the other one. But yeah, that kind of media takes it needs pretty good atmospheric conditions to survive. CDs and CD-ROMs and DVDs have a life expectancy of about 15 years at best. And a lot of the analog stuff will outlast CDs. So.
Okay, great. Well, this has been a wonderful webinar. You were able to answer not all, but most of the questions that were submitted. So thank you so much for your time. I will, once I gather the material from the speakers and the other things that I promised you all, I will send out a message. But thank you so much for your time on this cold winter day, and we will see you hopefully at an upcoming event soon.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.